Here we go, here we go, here we go. It's another different kind of episode of Change Your Pace Sports with alternative views. I'm your host, Kay. In this special episode, we're going to go over the most infamous NBA franchise, one that's probably been talked about maybe way too much lately in the wrong light, the New York Knicks. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to fix the Knicks, what the problems with the Knicks is, and we're going to play how to be a GM and actually go into fixing the Knicks. So let's start off with what actually are the real issues that have been surrounding this franchise for the last 20 years since owner James Dolan's taken over in 1999. So the biggest things that I've kind of identified with the New York Knicks, the first thing would be the media coverage of the New York Knicks. It's been a lot of negativity, a lot of bashing of the Knicks, a lot of scrutiny, a lot of criticizing of anything that comes out of the New York Knicks, whether it's player signings, whether it's coach hires, whether it's games that the team lost, whether it's players that they thought have underperformed or a bust. It's been a lot of negative coverage around the New York Knicks for the better half of the last 30 years. Number two, we have the perception of the New York Knicks around the city of New York and the fans' perception of the Knicks and impatience of their team, the New York Knicks. So, in New York, it seemed like the Knicks have not been keeping up with the other sports franchises, and that has been the perception for a long time. The Knicks are not the same as the New York Yankees. The Knicks are not the same as the New York Rangers. The Knicks are not the same as the New York Giants. The Knicks are not the same in the same sense as winning or the same reputation, the same success. And that has been a perception that the Knicks are just not doing as well around the city of New York. Then we have number three, probably maybe the biggest issue the Knicks have had. A lot of poor signings and a lot of poor hires and horrible fires. That James Dolan has to take a lot of credit for, or a lot of blame for. So we'll get into all three of these issues now, and I'll break them down one by one. So let's start off with the media coverage. Now, it's well known that the Knicks are the biggest media market in the United States. So the Knicks deal with a lot more coverage, a lot more journalists. There's a lot more major newspapers in New York City than any other market in the United States, comparable only to Los Angeles. Whereas like the Lakers are the only team that has anything close to the same kind of media scrutiny of the New York Knicks. But the Lakers have won a lot over the last 20 years. To be actually more accurate, over the last 21 seasons, the Lakers have won 5 championships, only tied with only the San Antonio Spurs as the most championships since 1999. So the Lakers haven't got the same level of scrutiny, even though we saw the Lakers dealing with a lot of scrutiny recently when they tried to rebuild the normal way, drafting and building that way. That didn't last long, as we saw the young players that they were drafting and building, Julius Randle, Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, all get impatient and be tossed out for more veteran players and star players. So, media coverage has a big deal of the reputation and the perception around the New York Knicks. ESPN, the New York Post, the New York Daily News have all been very, very critical of the New York Knicks for the better half of 30 years. And that is not my perception, that is not my opinion. That is just the reality of what the coverage has been. And they can say to their own point, the Knicks have not particularly done well to give them reasons not to have critical opinions or content about the New York franchise. Okay? Number two, the impatient and the perception of the Knicks around the city. Now, the argument is the Knicks have not been as good as, say, the New York Yankees, who have been dominant since the 90s. Or even the New York Rangers, who have been a very good hockey team in the NHL since the 90s. So, or even, say, the New York Mets, who have been to a couple of World Series since the 90s. Or, say, the New Jersey Nets, who are more the metropolitan basketball team. They've been to a couple finals under the Jason Kidd era. So, the perception is, like, why is it the New York Knicks haven't been able to maintain the same level of success in the New York market as other New York teams, like the New York Football Giants, so to speak, or specifically the New York Yankees? And I would say to that same accord, the New York Yankees play in a non-salary cap league. If the Knicks played in a non-salary cap league, they would have threw a lot of money at Michael Jordan and he would have become part of the New York Knicks. They would have threw a lot of money at Kobe Bryant. He would have become part of the New York Knicks. They would have threw $100 million at LeBron James. He would have became part of the New York Knicks. But when you don't have that kind of salary cap league, the Knicks have not had the benefit of being able to throw any number of the most money at whatever free agent they want. So that's a different situation that has been the perception of the New York Knicks, that they haven't, been able to garner the same kind of ability as these other teams. To that same point, Yankee fans have not had the same patience as, say, Yankee fans have been impatient just as New York Knicks fans. The difference is the Yankees have been able to hold court with their players, say the Derek Jeter or the Mariano Rivera, the Bernie Williams, when they were young players developing. The Yankees were more willing to stand by their young talent and watch them develop through the hardships than, say, the Knicks were with, say, Mark Jackson, Rod Strickland, and Kenny Skywalker, who were young players in the late 80s and early 90s. That's the whole situation with that particular issue that the Knicks have had to deal with. Just the perception around the city and the impatience of their fans. The impatience that they have not had for any of their particular young players. Even with Patrick Ewing, there was an impatience in the city that Patrick Ewing hasn't delivered yet. He hasn't stepped his game up yet. He hasn't been able to he's not as good as Akeem Olajuwon yet. He's not as good as Michael Jordan yet. That was a constant perception of Patrick Ewing when they never fully supported him or showed the patience that Pat will eventually get where he has to go. Which could be just sports in general, but in New York it's more illuminated. It's more highlighted in the New York market. And we've seen that even with Carmelo Anthony. The impatience of the city of Carmelo Anthony hasn't lived up to the billing. He hasn't been as good as LeBron James. And it's like, that's impatience. You haven't given him the time and the right coach and the right system to let Carmelo be as successful as any other superstar player in this league. So that's just one particular part that has been a huge issue for the New York Knicks throughout the last 20 years and throughout the last, probably since they won their last championship in the 70s. Moving into number 3, which is probably the hugest issue that the Knicks have had. One of maybe the biggest issue. All 3 of these are major issues in their own. But this is a huge issue in itself. The poor signings, the bad hires, and the horrible fires that the Knicks have had over the last 20 years. We can speak about the first horrible signing or poor signing was the Allen Houston contract. Signing Allen Houston was not a bad signing. Allen Houston was one of the more promising shooting guards at that time and could have been the second all-star to Patrick Ewing. But signing Allen Houston to, at the time, the highest contract in $100 million when he wasn't even a top 10 player in the NBA is no doubt just a bad contract, a bad signing. That is the classic example of overpaying. And the reason it's overpaying because in a salary cap league, you can only offer so much money to each player. So if you pay more than the necessary amount for one player, it lessens the amount of money you can go for other talent on the rest of your roster. And now that they had given Allen Houston that amount of money, Allen Houston and Patrick Ewing took up 3/4 of the Knicks salary cap for the next 10 years. You couldn't get any more talent on that roster or another all-star caliber player once you made that deal, which made the Allen Houston contract one of the worst contracts the Knicks could have made, and that was made by, at the time, GM Scott Layden. One of the probably one of Dolan's worst decisions he made was bringing in Scott Layden as a GM and sticking with Scott Layden for 4 years to let Scott Layden sign Allen Houston to that contract and also trade Patrick Ewing, probably the Knicks' greatest franchise player, for virtually nothing. Let's move into number 2 of poor signings, poor hires, and horrible fires. We have the Jerome James signing. This is under the Isaiah Thomas tenure. Jerome James had never proved in his 5 years in the NBA to be a consistent basketball player. He had a good playoff series, which was literally 5 games, and after that the Knicks signed him to a starter center's contract for 4 years, over several $1 million per year. That handicapped the Knicks for the next 3 seasons for getting a player that could come in and be a veteran player that can get that money for. It was a bad signing, and Jerome James never was able to play for the Knicks at all. So they got nothing back for that contract. Absolute horrible signing, and it was a premature signing. Isaiah Thomas signed him based on a good playoff series, without knowing that the coach that he was going to get was going to even utilize that player for what he did well in that one playoff series, which was just protect the rim. He did a lot of shot blocking. That's what Jerome James did well that particular playoff series. But then you bring in a coach that wants to run an offensive system. Jerome James has nowhere to play. It's a bad job, complete bad jobs. When he hired Lenny Wilkins as the coach, Lenny Wilkins had no use for Jerome James. It was a bad signing, bad pairing, bad matchup, bad fit. Move on to number 3. The Larry Brown hire and fire. This was one of the worst hires in New York Knicks history, and one of the worst fires in New York Knicks history. First off, they signed Larry Brown to, at the time, the richest contract for a coach in NBA history. I believe it was 5 years, $23 million, 5 years, $25 million. Just to give you some perspective, Steve Kerr is under the same contract with the Golden State Warriors now in 2019 that the Knicks gave to Larry Brown in 2002. To give you the gap, and Steve Kerr won championships with the Golden State Warriors. To give an understanding of what that money was and how much they gave to Larry Brown at that time. Larry Brown had just came over being a championship coach with the Detroit Pistons. He was famous for actually coaching Allen Iverson. And at the time, Stephon Marbury was considered on the same level of talent as Allen Iverson. And the idea was Larry Brown would be the perfect coach since he had Allen Iverson to coach Stephon Marbury, since the Knicks traded for Stephon Marbury. But what was not true, Larry Brown never liked Stephon Marbury as a player. Larry Brown never liked Allen Iverson as a player. Just because he coached these players and had success with them didn't mean that he actually was the right fit for these players. And not for nothing, Stephon Marbury always clashed with Larry Brown. To the day he says he hates that guy. Hates him, like, personally hates him. And Allen Iverson said, like, yo, me and Larry Brown, we clashed a lot. But now, after that, I'm not playing for him anymore. I got nothing but love for Coach Brown. So you mean while y'all played together, y'all never had a good relationship? So the two players that you're saying that was the reason for Larry Brown being there, neither one of them have a good relationship with Larry Brown. Hence why this is a horrible hire. And the reason they get on top of it now, after 1 year, which at the time was the Knicks' worst record in franchise history, that 1 year under Larry Brown, they fired him and had to pay him the entire contract. The whole 5 years, $20-something million, while only getting 1 year and the worst year in franchise history nonetheless. So that was just one of the worst situations, because the reality was they were impatient. Larry Brown has been known to have bad first years, but he's always had 10 plus win improvement in his second year. He's known for having great second years. So you don't even give him a second year? That's an impatient fire. So not only was it bad hire to begin with, the thing he's known for, second year rebounds, you don't even give him a chance to see if in the second year he does what he usually does. You fire him after 1 year. Horrible hire. Disturbing, disastrous fire. Let's move into number D, or number 4 of poor hirings, horrible hires, disastrous fires. The Phil Jackson dismissal. Now, Phil Jackson, like, if we look at it right now, what Phil Jackson did for this franchise, got all of their draft picks back, drafted Frank Ntilikina and Kristaps Porzingis, re-signed Carmelo Anthony, and got the Knicks contracts under control so they could sign whoever they want in free agency. That's literally what a GM is supposed to do to get a team ready to win a championship. So literally, and Phil left for bad press. He said, because Phil is a New York Knicks alumni. The last time they won championships, Phil Jackson was the sixth man. He played for that team that won championships with the Knicks. So he wanted to come back and bring them back to glory. He said that he didn't even want to come back to the NBA. I'm too old. He said, but when the Knicks offered me a chance to do that, I said this will be the last thing that I will do before I retire. I'll come out of retirement to try to help this team get back on page. I will leave before this team gets right. And he felt like when he left, the team was in the right situation. He left them with Kristaps Porzingis, Frank Ntilikina, Carmelo Anthony, and all of their draft picks and all of their money going forward. There was no reason for the Knicks with that will. Phil left them to be in the position they are now 2 seasons later. The Knicks should be a playoff team right now. When Phil left them where he left them at. If you trade Carmelo Anthony, who at the time was a top 30 player, there was no reason for the Knicks to not get back at least a top 50 player. That was a bad trade. Scott Perry so far has made a lot of bad trades. He's the current Knicks GM. He's made a lot of bad trades. We'll get into that later. But as far as the Phil Jackson dismissal, that's one of the worst things the Knicks did, and that's why the last 2 seasons have gone down the toilet. Phil Jackson has double-digit championships. He has 11 championships as a coach. He has 2 as a player. He has 2 as a coach outside of the NBA as a professional coach with the CBA. He has 15 professional basketball championships. If he doesn't know what it takes to get a championship level team, I really don't know who would know in the NBA other than say Pat Riley or Greg Popovich. There is no other guys in the league that have that kind of cliche and resume at all. And now let's go through what Phil Jackson said when he was here. Carmelo Anthony is no longer a star player. He's going to have to learn to adjust his game. Since Phil said it that year, what has Carmelo been? Has he been an all-star anymore? No, he hasn't. Has he been the same level player that he was? No, he hasn't. Has he needed to adjust his game? Yes, he has. Phil said that, 5 years ago. Next thing Phil said, Kristaps Porzingis might not be a franchise player. He's fragile. The way he's structured, he'll be a super talent, but he might not be healthy enough to be a franchise player. Porzingis has been hurt ever since. Again, everything Phil has said so far has came to fruition. When he drafted Frank Ntilikina, what was the Knicks' problem? Defense. They were one of the best offensive teams in the league. They had led the league in threes. They forgot the J.R. Smith, Steve Novak, Carmelo Anthony. They shot a lot of threes. They were a top-tier offense. Porzingis came in, top-tier offense. They were horrible defense. Carmelo's not a good defender. Horrible defense. So what did they do? They draft the best defensive point guard in the draft, Frank Ntilikina. His first year, he was 3rd in defense in the league. His rookie year, 3rd in defense, individual defensive metrics. 3rd in the league as a rookie. What did Phil say? That's what he's here for, to improve all perimeter defense. He did that from his first year. What did he bring in Porzingis to be? To take the mantle as a franchise player from Carmelo. So Phil steps back. He steps away from the franchise because Stephen A. Smith, the fan safe, Phil Jackson is not doing what he's supposed to do. He's not being a real GM. Phil Jackson was never the GM. He was the president. Greg Popovich is the president of the San Antonio Spurs. How often do you see Greg Popovich flying to go see college players play? He doesn't, because he's the president. On top of that, he's the coach, but he's also the president. Now, there's another situation just like that, with a guy just like that. Pat Riley with the Miami Heat. He's the president of basketball operations. He has a GM named Andy Elsman, who does a lot of the day-to-day moves. Pat Riley's not flying out to go see a bunch of players play at Duke University, North Carolina. So the idea that Phil Jackson wasn't being a good GM was because he was never the GM. He was the president. The GM was Steve Mills. Steve Mills was flying to see Frank Ntilikina. Steve Mills, who flew out to France 11 times to talk to Frank Ntilikina's coach, to scout Frank Ntilikina. So why are we now saying Phil Jackson? Phil is the one that's supposed to say yes or no. He's supposed to clean the decisions. And that's what he did. And he got the Knicks in the right position. Got their draft picks back. Got their salary under condition. Got their contracts under condition. And had the Knicks with young talent there. He drafted Damian Dotson, Kristaps Porzingis, Frank Ntilikina. All of these players, good players. You're trying to tell me Phil Jackson didn't know what he's doing? Some of the players that he signed. Justin Holiday. He brought in Derrick Rose. I said Derrick Rose. That's his name, right? Yeah. Derrick Rose. Yeah, he brought in Derrick Rose. Scored 19 a game in the triangle offense. Brought in Jeff Hornacek. Very good young coach. Came in second in coach of the year as a rookie coach with Phoenix. So the Phil Jackson dismissal, that was a horrible, disturbing, disastrous fire, basically. And those situations are the plagues, or the issues that have plagued the Knicks notoriously over these last 20 years. It's not just James Dolan as the owner. Those three specific things: the media coverage, the impatient and city perception around the Knicks, and the poor signings, horrible hires, terrible fires, have been the reason why the Knicks have struggled over these last years. And the biggest problem have been impatience of the Knicks, which can be attributed to James Dolan, the owner. The Knicks have had 13 different head coaches in the last 20 years. They've had 5 different GMs or head of the organizations. They've went through countless different players. And since James Dolan has taken over in 1999, not one New York Knicks drafted rookie has made it past their rookie contract and been part of the New York Knicks team since Dolan has taken over. So that can be attributed again to Dolan and impatience, or that can be attributed to, again, poor hires from James Dolan. So I'll also go over now how the media has perceived the Knicks' issues during these last 20 years that James Dolan has ran the Knicks. The first problem, or the main problem that all media outlets have had as the Knicks problem, is ownership, meaning James Dolan himself. So to that particular issue or blame or responsibility for the Knicks being so terrible these last 20 years, we're going to address that as James Dolan being a bad owner. Number 2, the biggest issue they have is development of players and free agency. The Knicks have struck out in free agency too often, and the Knicks have struggled to develop any players. Cool. That is actually a legitimate reason that the Knicks have struggled throughout these years. And the third reason has been the support of coaches and the support of the front office. That has been a huge issue here, and that can be directly attributed possibly to owner James Dolan. Definitely. So let's go into, is James Dolan, though, a bad owner? So to say if he was a bad owner, we have to start with saying, what is the owner's responsibility? Like, what is James Dolan supposed to actually do as the owner of the New York Knicks? So I looked up a definition of what NBA owners actually do. So this is the NBA owner's responsibility. They provide the operating capital necessary to run the team, pay for the arena and arena staff, pay the paychecks of the players and team staff, represent the team at owners' meetings, and lastly, identify and hire the front office staff with a general manager to handle the overall basketball operations of the franchise. So, nowhere do I see here that it says that a good owner wins a lot of games, a good owner goes to the playoffs every year, a good owner wins championships, a good owner makes sure that the media loves to actually report the team. Nowhere there does it say that. So I even made sure I went out and find what's the criteria for a good NBA owner. So number 1, the valuation of the franchise. How well does the team value go up or go down? What is the team's reputation in terms of economic value? Number 2, what is that team's attendance? How much customers are coming to actually see that team play, supporting that team? How much revenue is that owner generating for this particular team or franchise? And number 3, staff satisfaction, meaning how much do players, coaches, GMs like playing for that owner? Is there a lot of players, ex-owner, ex-GMs, ex-executive, ex-players, ex-coaches that say that they hated their time being with that franchise? Those would be the 3 criteria for a good owner. So let's start off with the first one. The valuation of the franchise. The reputation, economics, right? So, James Dolan took over in 1999. The Knicks were not the most valuable franchise at that point. So, the Knicks are, as of 2020, the most valuable franchise in the NBA. And I've also been able to get the numbers. In 2002, the Knicks were valued at $400 million, at approximately $400 million. As of 2020, the Knicks are valued at $4.6 billion, the most valuable franchise in the NBA. That is a 1,050% increase from 2002 to 2020. So, James Dolan is doing very well for his shareholders. So, as a owner of the New York Knicks franchise, he's doing very well very well in terms of valuation of the franchise and team economics. Then we go into a little further of the economics. Number two, customer support, attendance, revenue. The Knicks have averaged 19,000 in the Garden since 2001. And since 2001, they've never been under the top 10 in attendance. They've been top 5 in attendance 10 times. So 10 out of the 20 years, they've been top 5 in attendance. To show how much the Garden has been selling out, how much people have been supporting the New York Knicks as a franchise during James Dolan's 20 seasons with the Knicks. And then lastly, staff satisfaction. Now, how many former players, former coaches, former GMs have we actually came out and said they hated working for James Dolan? Even the ones that said they didn't have a good time in New York. We've never heard players say that they had a bad experience under James Dolan. Not a GM. Isaiah Thomas still says he's a great friend, loves James Dolan. Donnie Walsh, who stepped away, says he still has respect for James Dolan. You have former players. Patrick Ewing says still has love for Mr. Dolan. We see former players. Larry Johnson works there. John Starks works there. Latrell Sprewell works there. Former players continuously come back there. Clyde Frazier is the main announcer for the Knicks. He is the face of the Knicks. He is technically the greatest Knicks of all time, is Clyde Frazier. And he works for the Knicks. So how is this idea that James Dolan, former players or former coaches, former staff, don't like him? That's never came out. Who we know don't like James Dolan, we know that it means the media. We have reporters that have had beef with him because he's sensitive. He's cursed out reporters. He's cursed out media people. These are the people that don't like James Dolan. But again, media people have nothing to do with the fans coming into the building, or the players playing for the team, or the coaches coaching the team. They have nothing to do with it. You're just reporting what happens on the floor. You're not working for him. So he doesn't have to work for you or be courteous to you. Especially when you're printing critical and negative things about him and his franchise. Why would he be supportive and friendly to you? It just doesn't make a lot of sense to why James Dolan would be friendly to the media or have a great, open, loving space with the media. The media's been critical in New York since the 50s of all New York teams. George Steinbrenner had a very back and forth relationship with the media. And he was the owner of the Yankees for years, right? Was he successful? Never had a good relationship with the media. Wonder how that works out. So, in terms of James Dolan as a poor owner, all the criteria for a good owner, he matches up to that. So this idea, other than his team not winning, there's no signs that he's a poor owner. There's just no signs at all of that, other than the media pushing in our face that he's a poor owner. And it's easy for us to look at the Knicks' winning record and say, well, they're not winning. Well, obviously the guy that owns his team, he must be a bad owner. It's easy, but that's simple. Let's look at it a little further. Let's go for context before we go into saying, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's doing or he's bad at what he does. That's like saying, well, Michael Jordan was a bad basketball player because the Bulls wasn't in the playoffs his first 4 years in the league. Well, no, Michael Jordan was a hell of a good basketball player. His team wasn't good. So yeah, James Dolan's team hasn't been good. But that doesn't mean he was a bad owner or technically saying a bad player. Let's move forward, right? So now that we've looked at James Dolan as the owner, let's look at the other issues they've said. Knicks developing players. That is an absolute fact. Knicks have struggled to develop players for sure. The last rookie that the Knicks have extended past their rookie contract was Charlie Ward. Charlie Ward was drafted by the Knicks in the 1994 NBA draft. I can do the math. That's 26 years. In 26 years, you have not been able to re-sign none of your rookies? You have a rookie every season. That is horrible development. You can't develop somebody if they're not here the past 4 years. You just can't. And when you do not develop your players, that means you overpay for players from other teams that you have to get. So in free agency, yes, the Knicks have completely struggled. Why? Because they've constantly had to pay a little more than what the market would bear for that player because they didn't develop that player and they're not in position to be able to make that player take a discount because the team is doing well. They've never been in that position in the last 20 years. Number 3, the coaches and the front office support. This is also a fact. They've had 13 head coaches in the last 20 years. That means that almost no coach has really made it past their second season with the team. That means there's no support that has been there for any of these coaches. That they can't even get past 2 years with the team. Like the last coach that had the Knicks win the Atlantic Division, Mike Woodson, in 2014, didn't even make it to the third year. So to kind of give you an understanding of like, yeah, there's been no support for the coaches. But on the terms of running the organization, there's been a little bit more support from James Dolan from the top bomb. There's only been 5 people to run the organizations in the last 20 years. And let's run through those last 5. Number 1, we had Scott Layden. He was the GM from 1999 to 2003. During his era, we could say he signed Allen Houston to the massive contract. And he also was the one that traded Pat Ewing away. Those are some of the things that he did under his tenure. He was a GM that came in the year that the Knicks actually went to the finals. The last year, the Knicks were pretty good at all. Number 2, we had Isaiah Thomas. He was running the Knicks from 2003 to 2008. During his tenure, they traded for Stephon Marbury. They made the playoffs a couple times. But they also had a massive lawsuit in the firing and hiring of Larry Brown. Number 3, we had Donnie Walsh. Donnie Walsh is notorious for developing the Indiana Pacers, drafting, developing Reggie Miller and that team over there. He was with the Knicks from 2008 to 2011. He's notable for bringing in Mike D'Antoni, for spearheading the Carmelo Anthony trade that eventually brought Carmelo back to New York into the Knicks. He drafted Danilo Gallinari. That was Donnie Walsh, but he stepped down when James Dolan stepped in and made him actually trade for Carmelo. Donnie Walsh wanted to wait for Carmelo in the offseason, but the Nets said that they would give up the whole team to get Carmelo, and that made James Dolan say, step in and make Donnie Walsh trade for Carmelo Anthony at the trade deadline, which made Donnie Walsh step away at the end of the season from not having full control over the team. So that we can sort of blame again for James Dolan there. Number 4, we had Glenn Grunwald. It was from 2011 to 2013. He's who brought in Mike Woodson, who actually eventually became the coach that brought the Knicks to the playoffs. He also made the trade for Bargnani, which didn't eventually work out. Andrea Bargnani, he's the one that made that trade. But he also signed J.R. Smith, brought him in. He's the one, I believe, who signed Jeremy Lin. He's who discovered the Jeremy Lin. So Grunwald did some good things for the Knicks, but then got unceremoniously let go when James Dolan got the opportunity to bring in Phil Jackson. He just dropped Glenn Grunwald in the middle of that, showing impatience again, and brought in Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson ran the Knicks from 2014 to 2017, and then over the last 2 years, from 2017 to 2019, it's been Steve Mills. So those have been the last, basically, 5 guys that ran the Knicks for the last 20 seasons over this course. So yeah, there's been a lot of influx, because like of the last 20 years, the Miami Heat have only had one person run that organization. That is Pat Riley. The San Antonio Spurs have only had one person run that organization. That is Greg Popovich. And let's go with the teams that have been good over the last 20 years. In the last 20 years, 16 championships have went to 4 teams in the last 20 years. Those 4 teams are the Los Angeles Lakers, with 5 championships, tied with the most with the San Antonio Spurs. With 5 championships, the Miami Heat come in third with 3 championships, and the Golden State Warriors dynasty with 3 championships. Now, if you look at all 4 of these teams, the Lakers have only had 2 guys running. Well, in the last 20 years, 3 guys. Jerry West, Mitch Kupchak, and now Magic Johnson, Rob Pelinka. 3 guys over those last 20 years. San Antonio Spurs, one guy. Greg Popovich over the last 20 years. Miami Heat, one guy. That would be Pat Riley. Golden State Warriors over the last 20 years, it's actually been two. They had Larry Riley, and now what's the dude name? Lacob. Dude Lacob that's running it right now. It's been two guys, Larry Riley and Lacob, have been the two ones that run it for the last 20 years. So you can see the success that they've had by having the same people in place over the last 20 seasons versus the Knicks constantly flipping different people. And to speak to the Knicks not developing players, so I've heard people say, well, if the Knicks had got the right players, they would have been able to develop. If the Knicks had just got lucky and got a LeBron James, or they got a Steph Curry, or got a Michael Jordan, or got a Magic Johnson, everything would have took care of itself. We just hadn't got lucky. You got a Patrick Ewing in the 80s. And now, of the last 20 years, well, let's go over the three special players over the last 20 seasons. The most special players. The most one that everybody can recognize, the most recognizable one, is actually LeBron James. King James. The best player of the last 20 seasons. Well, LeBron James didn't make the playoffs his first 3 seasons. He had 3 different head coaches his first 3 seasons. So if that's typical to the New York Knicks, he wouldn't have made it past his first 4 seasons. He would have got traded. He would have got moved like any other rookie that wasn't able to make it to the playoffs in his first 3 seasons. And he would have been gone. So LeBron would have never lasted to be the LeBron James or whatever he became. The next guy we have here, Stephen Curry, the Splash Brother, the unanimous MVP. Steph Curry wasn't an All-Star till his 5th season. So, I mean, in New York, like, if you're not an All-Star in the first 3 years of your rookie contract, you're gone. The media is calling you a bust. Steph Curry was a bust, technically, in New York. He would have been gone. He didn't make the playoffs till his 4th season. So his first 3 years, they were trash. So in New York, he'd have been considered a bust. He'd have been considered, what the word is, underperforming. That's the one they love to use in New York. Underperforming. Cool. And Steph Curry also had 3 different head coaches in his first 4 seasons. They would have said, well, he's the reason these coaches keep getting fired. He has to go. And then lastly, we have Kevin Durant, considered the most unstoppable offensive force of this generation. 7-foot shooting guard. He wasn't an All-Star till his 3rd season either. He didn't make the playoffs till his 3rd season either. So again, going by the New York standards of high draft picks, all 3 of these guys were busts. All 3 of these guys should have been traded. And that's why the Knicks have never had a Steph Curry, a LeBron James, or a Kevin Durant in the last 20 years. So, now that we went over the issues that have plagued the New York Knicks over the last 20 seasons, and we've seen what has went wrong for the Knicks over the last 20 seasons, I'm gonna I'm gonna be nice here, and I'm gonna do what we do here at Change Your Pace Sports, and I'm gonna show what can happen or what will need to be done to actually make the Knicks right. How can we fix the Knicks? I'm gonna give the steps, I'm gonna give the tools, I'm gonna give the resources to actually fix the Knicks. I am actually that good. I can actually show you what you need to do to get the Knicks right. And I get for all Knicks fans, you probably want to sit down, you probably want to get your popcorn, you probably want to do what you do to get yourself right, because this is what you've been waiting on for the last 20 years. What the Knicks need to do. What is the golden path to the Knicks finally becoming good again? The Garden actually not having hot trash, as Stephen A. Smith says, playing for them. Let's get started. So the first thing you need to do to fix the New York Knicks, to fix any organization, you have to start with your front office. You have to start with who's running things. Who's the one that actually makes sense. So the Knicks have consistently went for the splashy hire. They went for the guy that the media has really purported as the best available GM, the best available basketball mind. They've chased after these guys. Like, they chased after Isaiah Thomas. They chased after Phil Jackson. They chased down Donnie Walsh. But were these particular the best people for the New York Knicks? Phil Jackson, yeah. But the rest of these guys, I can't say for sure. So, the first move they would have to do would be looking into the front office and then selecting a coach from the front office, out of the front office. So the three things that we're going to look over to how to fix the New York Knicks is, one, we're going to look over the front office, and then from the front office look to who's going to be the head coach, who's going to run the whole team, and then who's going to run the team on the floor every night. Those two are the most important leadership structures that you start off with when you're building a franchise, a sports franchise. Number two, your identity. For you to have a success with any sports organization, you have to have an identity. What makes people outside of it know what the team stands for, what makes the team successful, and what would allow people to add to the success of that particular team. You have to have an identity. So that'll be the next part. Figuring out, building, set forth what is the identity. Then number three, roster adjustments. Making sure your roster makes sense for your team to be successful. Because if it's a sports team, for it to compete, you have to have the players that can compete with other teams. So you have to have a roster that is talented enough to compete with other teams. So the Knicks have to adjust to have enough talent on the roster. So let's go into how we would go about doing all these three entities to fix the New York Knicks. So, the front office, leadership. So first thing you want to do is to bring in a GM or a president. So the way that I would go about that, I would bring in somebody that has had experience building championships in the NBA. There's only a handful of those available at all times that have been able to build a championship team and has experience around championship teams in the NBA. Now the Knicks have already selected their president and GM of the future. That is Leon Rose. So for this particular thing, we'll just say that Leon Rose is going to be the guy that is going to be in charge of now going forward, and we hope that he has experience. He's been around championship players. He's represented championship players. So we can say that he's been around championship teams in that sense. So he is a good hire. So we'll see how he can go forward going on with the Knicks. But that is the first thing. So the Knicks right now they have a good start right now. They have a good president that they have just hired in Leon Rose. Now the next move on this leadership structure. They have to pick a coach. Before they pick a coach, they have to understand what coaching style do they want to bring in. That starts again now with that GM. Leon Rose has to figure out, what does he think a championship coach in New York would look like? And what style would that be? And now he needs to now set up coaches that fit that style. Not just who's the best coach available. Because the most talented coach is not for the New York Knicks. It's not for the New York market. So you have to now determine who would fit in this New York market under this scrutiny and also be fit for the players and the style that you want to bring in. So that's the next move. Then C, they have to create now what is the basketball philosophy that now the coach, the leadership, and all that will now bring forth. Are we going to be a team that's about offense? Fast off. We want to be one of the best offensive teams. Do we want to be one of the best defensive teams? Do we want to be one of the smartest basketball teams? Do we want to be one of the most athletic basketball teams? One of the fastest teams? You have to now determine what's your basketball philosophy that you're going to stand on. So now your coach stands on it too, and now your GM is looking for players that can fit that basketball philosophy. So if you now look at the Lakers right now, they're about size and IQ. You can clearly see every player that they have right now has a high basketball IQ and has a physical freakish size. So if you look at the Lakers roster right now, Anthony Davis, size-wise, he's 6'11" with a 7'4" wingspan. He's physically, his size is special for his position. Their center, JaVale McGee, 6'11" with a 7'5" wingspan. His size is an extreme size for his particular position. Anthony Davis has one of the highest IQs for his position. LeBron James is one of the biggest sizes for his position. 6'9", 7-foot wingspan. One of the highest basketball IQs in the league. At the shooting guard, Danny Green, 6'6", 6'10" wingspan. Size, again, and high basketball IQ. Played for North Carolina. Played for the San Antonio Spurs. High basketball IQ. Rajon Rondo, 6'4", 6'11" wingspan. High basketball IQ. So now you can tell the Lakers' basketball philosophy is technically size and basketball IQ. You can clearly see what they're going after. So now when they signed Dion Waiters has a high basketball IQ. He fits right into their basketball philosophy. Markieff Morris has a high basketball IQ. Fits right into the basketball philosophy. Sure enough. Let's move now into number 2. Identity. You have to now, based on that philosophy, the philosophy sets your identity in place. Now, once you have your basketball philosophy, the identity becomes easy because now your first step for identity is to establish your franchise player. Your franchise player is essentially the identity of your team. That's what people will look at and say, well, that's what so when they look at the Milwaukee Bucks, really what they're looking at is Giannis Antetokounmpo. He is the identity to what that team is. So when you look at the Los Angeles Lakers, they're LeBron James right now. Their identity is equivalent to who their best player is, or their franchise player is. Because not every team has a franchise player. They might have a best player, but they don't have a franchise player. Those are two different things. So like right now, the Knicks' best player is probably Julius Randle. He's their best talented player right now in the NBA. But their franchise player will technically be RJ Barrett. He has the highest potential. He probably will become the best player on this team when all things become equal. So he would technically be their franchise player. He has the highest potential. But their best player is Julius Randle right now. So to terms of identity, so to explain like identities and like your franchise player being your identity and your basketball philosophy being according to your franchise player. Let's look at the teams that have been super successful since the last 20 years. Let's go to the Los Angeles Lakers. During a lot of that time, their best player was Kobe Bryant. So the identity was through Kobe Bryant. What is Kobe Bryant? He was the most competitive player in the league, virtually. So now for the Lakers to be that good, literally, they're the most competitive team. And you saw them throughout that term, they were the most competitive team. Basically, that basketball philosophy was, through 48 minutes, we're going to be as competitive as anybody. We're going to grind with anybody. They wasn't the best offensive team during that era. They wasn't the best defensive team during that era. So what was their identity? Kobe Bryant. They were the most competitive team during that era. That's what made them that successful. Let's move into the San Antonio Spurs. Their identity goes with their franchise player during that era, Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan was the most fundamentally sound player of his era. He's considered Mr. Fundamentals. So what are the Spurs known for during that era? Being the sharpest team, the most efficient team. Well, the identity comes directly from their franchise player. And now their philosophy builds around him. Hence the success that they had. Everything fit, everything matched up. The Miami Heat, for a lot of their success, their team is built around Dwayne Wade. Dwayne Wade's identity is virtually, he has high basketball IQ, and he's a high-level competitive player. He makes big plays. He makes the right plays all the time, and high-level competitor. Comes to work. He's a hard worker. Doesn't need the flash and frills. Will come to work and compete against anybody. He's as talented as anybody will compete against anybody. But if you look at the Miami Heat during that era, what do you think they stand on? They kind of just went hard against anybody. Well, that's because their identity stands with their franchise player during that era, Dwayne Wade. Now we go into the Golden State Warriors, the last super successful franchise. Their identity goes with their franchise player, Stephen Curry. Stephen Curry is one of the most skilled players of his generation. Then if you look at now what the Golden State Warriors been through their era, they were the best shooting team of the era. What is Steph Curry? The greatest shooter of all time. The identity fits directly to their franchise player. So now for the Knicks, the first thing they need to do is establish their franchise player. They technically have one, RJ Barrett. And RJ Barrett's thing is, he's a super competitive person. That is his identity. So he will compete against anybody at any time. He's been the most competitive player in his draft class since he was little. So if you build around him, your job is now to bring a bunch of competitive players around him. The Knicks have some of those already. Frank Ntilikina is super competitive. Mo Harkless is super competitive. Dennis Smith Jr. is super competitive. But some of the other players do not match. Like Kevin Knox is not a super competitive person. He's more of a laid-back, talented player. He'll be more fit with the Golden State Warriors. He's a skilled ball player. But skill is not what would match RJ Barrett. Like, just won't. So, You can see on the team already who matches what RJ Barrett is and who doesn't. So, number 2 of the 3 things to build an identity, you build the team style around your franchise player, and your coach has to build his system around that franchise player. So now the next move for the Knicks now is with the coach that they have, he has to now identify, like with the GM and everybody else, that this is the franchise player. This is the identity that our franchise player is. So now this is the coaching system that we're going to build around this franchise player, which we can say is RJ Barrett. And this is the coaching style that coaching system, So offensive plays, defensive plays that will fit around and maximize RJ Barrett or whoever your franchise player is. Then lastly, about building your identity, now you secure players and player roles that fit the team style and now fit around that identity and around your franchise player. Part of building the identity of a team and why they play the same every game is having players that play up to their roles, accept their roles, and now excel in their roles. So now the identity gets strengthened because they're all doing the same thing and excelling at what they're doing every time they play. Hence now the strengthening of, that's what that team is. So if you're looking now at the Milwaukee Bucks, their identity is built around Giannis Antetokounmpo. And now, so Giannis, his skill set is, he's a freak of nature. He's technically a 6'11" point guard that can bulldozer his way to the paint and basically score in the paint at will. So now, if that's what Giannis is, he's a two-way star that is built around a physical specimen. You would build around that. So you make sure that you have people that adjust to the skills that he's not skillful at. So if you look at what they've built around him, Eric Bledsoe, he's a very skilled point guard. He can run an offense with the best of them. He knows how to run an offense. That's to pick up on where Giannis is not that skilled at running a set offense. They bring in Wesley Matthews. He's a sharpshooter. It's to spread the floor and add the skill of through shooting that Giannis is not skilled in. Brook Lopez. He's a shot blocker and he's a 3-point shooter. Again, Giannis is limited in shooting. Brook is there to enhance that. I'm able to nullify the skill that you don't have, Giannis. I'm building around Giannis. They all fit around Giannis. But now they fit their roles very well. So now every time we see the Bucks, whether Giannis plays or not, that identity remains the same. Because they're all playing their roles, whether Giannis is on the court or not. Sure enough. And that's how your identity gets built. So based on now, we're moving on this identity. Number 3 on how to fix a team, roster adjustments. So the idea of building a roster, making sure that your team has one of the more talented rosters. The first thing you want to do is make sure which current players fit and which don't. And this starts with, again, you start off again with what's your basketball philosophy, and that starts with whoever is leading your organization. So with Miami Heat, that's Pat Riley. With San Antonio, that's Greg Popovich. Then you move into what's the basketball philosophy. We're going to be a fast team. We're going to be a hard-working team. We're going to be an elite offensive team. What's the basketball philosophy? Then, who's the franchise player? What is the franchise player? So now, once you start to build your roster now, what current players fit? Well, which ones fit alongside the coaching, the basketball philosophy? Which ones fit along the identity, and which ones fit around the franchise player? So, which ones on the current roster do or don't? You see that throughout. You just look at the last season, and you look at the last season. You say now, okay, he didn't play that well in this system. He didn't fit the role that we thought he would. He didn't fit that role that we thought he would. He didn't match up to our overall identity that we bring here. And then you move on. Or you say now he did, and we will advance his role next season. We want to bring him back. He fits exactly the role we needed him to play. He fits exactly the style of basketball that we play here. And he fits around our franchise player exactly the way we wanted him to. So let's try to bring him back. Let's secure him. Number 2, you have to know which future free agents and current free agents fit and don't fit. And that goes back to the same idea again. Which players are not on your team last year that you can look at, and you look at their style of game and what they did last year, that could fit around your franchise player, fit around your basketball philosophy as an organization, and can fit around the identity that you've established as a team. You should know every year what free agents can and cannot fit And which future ones, 2 years in the future, 3 years in the future, can and cannot fit. And then lastly, the draft. You have to be able to understand which players are coming into the NBA. Also, fit around the identity that you have, fit around the basketball philosophy that you've established, fit around your current franchise player. You have to see which players coming out will make sense. That's how you get steals. That's how you get gems. Because they fit. And now we can develop them to the best of their ability. That's how you develop players. By knowing how to develop them, aligning with our philosophy. Not just by saying he's a good talent, and if we just playing him enough, he'll develop to be a good player. That's not how players develop. That's only how superstar talent develop. Just letting them play. Because they already have all the skills. They just need to adjust to the NBA level. That's what Luka Doncic, LeBron James, Zion Williams, they already dominate basketball. Like, I don't need to fit into a system. Just let me now adjust to this next level of basketball. I will be able to be good regardless of what team you put me on. I'm that talented to basketball. So, those are rare plays in themselves. Those are what you would actually consider franchise players. Where you could put them on any team, their skills are still going to show out. That is an actual franchise player. That's the difference between an elite player and a franchise player. You could be a top 20 player, but not a franchise player. Because you don't actually dictate making the rest of your players better. But you're as skilled as anybody in the league. That's just the difference there. So, all in conclusion, after hearing all of this, we have a good idea of how the Knicks should be fixed. So the last thing I'll give you guys on how the Knicks should be fixed, now that the Knicks already have picked Leon Rose to be the new head of the organization, I'm going to go ahead and help Leon Rose to pick the coach. So I'm going to go ahead and give 5 potential coaches that the Knicks could actually look into that would be great candidates, that each one of them will be the right choice. I'm going to give you the 5 candidates. So let's go into the 5 possible head coaches for the Knicks going into 2020-2021. So number 5 is actually the current interim head coach, Mike Miller. Mike Miller has been a coach for over 30 years. He has a lot of coaching experience, with less than teams. He was with a mid-major Division I team for years, was able to actually get them to a championship. He got the Westchester Knicks in the G League to the finals in 2018. He's the 2018 G League Coach of the Year. He's used to working with younger players, younger talent, lesser talent, and developing, working with what they have and getting them to do the best that they can, putting players in positions to be successful regardless of what the name on the back of the jersey is. That's what Mike Miller would bring in. He would be an excellent candidate to also bring consistency, what the Knicks have just not had. So like the players right now, again, familiar with him, you bring him back next year and you actually give him the support that no head coach has had basically for the last 20 years and say like, give him a 4-year contract and say like, yeah, we're going for Mike Miller. Let him develop all these young kids here. He can be a good coach. That's number 5, Mike Miller. Number 4, David Vanderpool. David Vanderpool is actually the associate head coach for the Minnesota Timberwolves right now. So basically he's an assistant coach. He's the head assistant coach to Ryan Saunders with the Minnesota Timberwolves right now. So the reason why I believe David Vanderpool would be an excellent head coaching candidate, he's never been a head coach before. He would be again a nice diamond in the rough. First time find the next great candidate or head coach, I believe. So let me give you a couple of points to why I believe David Vanderpool would be a great candidate for the Knicks. So he's been an assistant coach for the Portland Trail Blazers for the last 7 years, from 2012 to 2019. So he was one of the main coaches as part of that staff that developed that young team when we saw them develop a young core team to a playoff team. Where we saw Damian Lillard from the point of being drafted to the point where he's a superstar and they're a perennial playoff team. He was part of that staff. He was one of the main assistant coaches on that staff, developing C.J. McCullough, developing Ufik and Collins. So the fact that he has experience, and we see that he has experience, successful experience, developing star players to the nature of a Damian Lillard, he becomes an excellent candidate. So where I feel like he fits specifically for the Knicks, David Vanderpool as a player was an actual international star and international champion as a player. So he was a former Russian League MVP, Italian League MVP. So he has a lot of experience as an international dominant basketball player, which would make a lot of sense for the way that the league is going, as just in terms of knowing the other players in the league, like Luka Doncic, Kristaps Porzingis, Nikola Jokic, Pascal Siakam, Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, all these superstar international players, Ricky Rubio, that are in the league right now, that are important. He has international understanding. He has an international game feel, like a Mike D'Antoni. So and then his experience as being a star on the international level allows him to also be able to understand what stars deal with in terms of that New York pressure and what it means like when it's your scrutiny of just big media. Like he was the entire league, but he's from another country MVP. That's a different kind of scrutiny. So he might understand better how the players got to deal with the scrutiny in the New York media. And then we got number 3. So speaking of player development, which the Knicks badly need, from 2010 to 2012, he was the director of player personnel for the OKC Thunder. Now the OKC Thunder are the crown team right now of the last 15 years of developing superstar talents. Whether it's Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Serge Ibaka, Steven Adams, Reggie Jackson. This OKC team has perennially developed star talent that they've drafted and developed. And to hear that David Vanderpool was the director of player personnel in the heart of that time, that's impressive. That means he has a huge hold on player development, has a huge ability to do player development. It would be a huge pickup for the Knicks. And then lastly, he's also coached on the Canadian senior national basketball team. RJ Barrett is a player on the national Canada team. And the second round pick for the Knicks, Ignas Berdinkas, is also part of the Canadian national team. So they have 2 players that will be a part of the future that are both going to be part of the senior Canadian national team. And the fact that David Vanderpool is already a coach on the senior Canadian national team is another reason it could be a good match for him to be the next potential head coach for the New York Knicks. Alright? So I really do like David Vanderpool. They say he's a wizard of offense. He knows a lot about offensive plays and setting up. That's why he's the associate head coach for the Timberwolves. And then the first 10 games of the year, the Timberwolves are on an actual record pace for offense, and that was all a cue and credit to David Vanderpool also. Having Andrew Wiggins and Karl-Anthony Towns playing at a super high level in the first 10 games of the year. Which, because the head coach was a first-year head coach, youngest head coach, Ryan Sanders. So the associate head coach, being David Vanderpool, had a lot to do with the early success this year of the Minnesota Timberwolves. And the fact that they're offensively, they're top 15 still, and ranking has a lot to do with Mr. Vanderpool. Let's move into number 3 of the possible head coaches list that I put together. Number 3, I have assistant head coach for the Boston Celtics, Mr. Scott Morrison. Now, Mr. Scott Morrison might be unknown to majority of basketball fans. As I'm saying it, most people might be having question marks saying like, okay, who the hell is this guy? Never heard of this guy in your life, probably. Now, Scott Morrison is the assistant coach for the Boston Celtics. He's under Brad Stevens. Now, the reason that I've identified him and selected him as a possible head coach for the New York Knicks is he's the defensive coordinator of that Boston Celtics team. The Boston Celtics had an elite defense since Brad Stevens took over as the coach. And Scott Morrison has been the defensive coordinator there for the last 2 seasons. I believe that defense wins championships, and all of the elite head coaches in the NBA and most of the elite teams have an elite defensive head coach running their situation. So if we even look at the championship teams again, San Antonio Spurs, Greg Popovich is a defensive coach. Miami, when they won the championship, Eric Spoelstra is a defensive coach. Steve Kerr promoted defense. Mark Jackson was a defensive coach that had created that identity for that Golden State team. He was a defensive coach. Mike Budenholzer is a defensive coach. Brad Stevens is a defensive coach. So I believe that defensive coaches and defense win championships, and that's how you really build teams to be good. Nick Nurse believes in being defensive first, right? That's the coach of the Toronto Raptors. So I think Scott Morrison being one of the elite defensive coordinators and defensive assistant coaches in the NBA right now would also make him a potential candidate. But that's just one of the many good reasons I have for Scott Morrison being the next head coach. He's the 2015 G League Coach of the Year. He led the Maine Red Claws to a G League, D League finals appearance. So he's shown that he's been able to coach teams up on this level and shown that he's a high-level developmental coach. He also is one of the coaches on the Canadian national basketball team of the under-18, so he's already coached Knicks star R.J. Barrett and Knicks second-round draft pick of last year, Ignace Berdinkas. He's coached them already on the under-18 Canadian national team. And Scott Morrison's father was a coach in Massachusetts for over 30 years. So he's a coach's son that's been around basketball for his entire life. So he would be considered a basketball lifer. So to me, it's like he's the next great head coach in the NBA, whichever team gets him. I'm identifying him as the next great head coach in the NBA. So he would be an excellent choice for the Knicks to bring in as a possible next head coach. Now, the next two coaches I have here on this list is because they're ideal. They're absolutely ideal head coaches for the Knicks situation moving forward. So number 2, I have international guru, part of the Knicks organization right now, as counselor to James Dolan, former Cleveland Cavaliers head coach, David Blatt. Now, David Blatt is arguably the greatest international basketball head coach in history. Arguably. He's won double-digit basketball championship internationally. In his only year as a head coach in the NBA, he took the Cleveland Cavaliers and LeBron James to the NBA Finals. His only season as an NBA coach. Just to show you how dominant he is as a coach. Mike D'Antoni looks up to him as an international coach. David Blatt has won championships in multiple different leagues. He's been coach of the year in multiple different leagues. And he could have been the coach of the year in the NBA. He's coach of the year in the Russian league, the Italian league, the Israel league. He's one of the greatest coaches hands down. And he's already in-house. He's already the counselor to James Dolan right now for the Knicks. So if I'm Leon Rose, the first thing I'm doing is I'm asking David Blatt if you want to be the head coach. That's your first move you should do. Turn right to David Blatt and say, yo, you want a 6-year deal? You want that? Do you want to do this for us? That would be my first move at NC. Now, the only one that could be possibly better for this particular New York Knicks situation, the only other person I feel would be the greatest and the most ideal head coach for the Knicks. Queens-born, former New York Knicks 1988 Rookie of the Year, Mark Jackson. Now, Mark Jackson was the head coach of the last dynasty in the development stages. He developed the Golden State's identity for Steph Curry and the Splash Brothers. He is the one that developed the last dynasty in the NBA. So he is the ideal coach you can snatch up. And he's a free agent. You don't have to go out there and get him. You don't got to trade something to get him from another team. He's a free agent that wants to coach, been trying to coach, that you just interviewed before, and he was one of the finalists for your last open head coaching position. He was a finalist against David Blatt to be the head coach. So Mark Jackson is the guy. There is no other guy that would be the ideal candidate for this next job. And let's go over some of the reasons real quick. So he was the coach for the development of Steph Curry. So he has experience developing a high-level team of a championship level. He made them an elite defensive team even though they're offensively talented. They're offensively gifted. But they were an elite defensive team. So that means that he can make young players develop a strong defensive identity. Now let's go into the next side of it. He's one of the greatest point guards of all time. So as far as him knowing the game and knowing the way basketball works at a high level, he is one of the greatest basketball minds of all time. Then he's been a media personnel for the last 10 years. So the problem of the Knicks, the biggest problem the Knicks have had that we've looked up in issues is with the media. Mark Jackson experience with the media the last 10 years, he would be the ideal candidate to be able to lessen or improve the image the Knicks have with the media. Because he was a media and is a media guy for the last 10 years. So he's super ideal for that, to solve all their problems. So the Knicks' biggest problem, Media. Media perception and dealing with the media. Mark Jackson is a former media guy of the last 10 years. And the best media guy right now. Gets paid the most. 2. Impatience of the fans. Mark Jackson is a New Yorker. A lifetime New York Knicks fan. He's from Queens. Grew up a Knicks fan. Got drafted by the Knicks. Went to St. John's. He understands the fans better than probably anybody could. He's one of them. So the fact that for him being able to solve that problem, he would be the guy. Number 3, development and free agent signings. Again, develop Steph Curry, develop Klay Thompson, is beloved by all stars in the league. All 3 things that the Knicks have struggled at. He clicks off every box on an elite level. He will solve every last one of those issues. And I'm not saying it because like I'm his brother or like I'm his agent or like I really want Mark to get it. Like if you look at what the Knicks need from their head coach, he checks every box off at an elite level. Not just, oh, he's good at this, or he's good at X's and O's, he's good at developing, or he's good with the media. No, he's elite at the media. He's elite at development. He's elite at X's and O's. He has it all. And he's from New York. And he's a former New York Knicks player. And he's actually one of the last New York Knicks that were drafted that was the rookie of the year for the Knicks. So like he has all the reason for him to be the guy. And then Knicks fans that have been problems, like Stephen A. Smith, people in the media that claim to be Knicks fans that just talk nothing but critical things, actually support Mark Jackson too. So right off the bat, he would right off the bat be beloved and be supported, and they would have the patience because they would give him a chance. So with that being said, that is exactly how you fix the New York Knicks. And that is not the most difficult thing to do. And you're very welcome for solving the Knicks' 40-year problem. This is another special episode of Change of Pace Sports with alternative views. And we're now going to get ready for the first press conference of be a GM of the New York Knicks, as I now take a press conference of how I would actually fix the Knicks as the GM. That will be coming up in the next episode of Change of Pace Sports as we do the how to fix the New York Knicks. Peace. There we go. We got a special episode here of Change of Pace Sports. We're continuing with the special edition episode of How to Fix the New York Knicks. And this will be the press conference part of the How to Fix the Knicks. Be a GM segment. I will play the GM. I'll play the president. I'll be the head of the New York Knicks organization. And we'll open this to reporters, journalists, part of the Change of Pace Sports team. And I'm going to head and answer the questions as the head of the Knicks, as the direction should be for the Knicks. So as we go get started, I'm going to introduce as the new president of the Knicks, Leon Rose. Going to accept 10 questions. And let's go ahead and get started. Mr. Smith, go right ahead, sir.
All right. Will there be any more changes in the front office? It's a 2-part question. As far as and if so, would it be Perry or Miller be looking elsewhere?
Okay, excellent question, Mr. Smith. You were saying, will there be any more changes in the front office now that I've taken over as president?
Mm-hmm.
There'll always be. I think the entire situation is fluid. We're always going to be looking at different ways to improve the entire team, and that goes from top to bottom. But in terms of right now, we're very comfortable with the players in place. We're just going to give it to the end of the season, and then we'll kind of relook at everything and see if anything needs to be reshuffled. But right now, I'm very comfortable with everybody here and what I'm seeing so far. Next question, Mrs.
Camden?
Mrs. Camden.
Do you think the core players being younger does it make it difficult to win games?
Excellent question, Mrs.
Camden.
Camden. Uh, yes, we do have a very young roster. It's about a lot of young players. And I think, yes, in the NBA, it's very difficult to win games. And we have a lot of young players that are struggling to be able to make it happen. It does take a while for you to be able to win games, you know. But I do feel like as they improve, just being young is not an excuse not to win games. We could play better, and we expect to play better. But I think being young in the NBA does contribute a lot to losing because they're still developing every game. Yes.
Okay.
Next question, Mrs. Smith.
Um. So you've spoken a lot about like the media is at fault.
Yes.
Um. How is that if it's the media, if the organization is supposed to be strong, like how is it letting outside noise affect what's going on?
Excellent.
And what can you do to improve this if that is the situation?
Excellent question. Excellent question, Mrs. Smith. Yes. I think when organizations are not necessarily strong or at their peak, other things can attribute to non-successful moments, and I think a lot of those have occurred here in New York. Um, I wouldn't necessarily put all the responsibility and onus on the New York media. What I will say, they haven't contributed to a very optimistic environment for the New York franchise. So I'm not. What I would say we could do now that I'm here and going forward, well, we would try to have more of just a better dialogue with the New York media here, but also doing better on our own to put out our own narratives. I think in the recent years, the Knicks front office has did a better job putting out their own narrative, and I think we'll continue that now, and that will better attribute to less of the combativeness with the New York media uh, people here. Next question, Mrs. Camden.
Okay. This is a two-part question. Um, with a young team, what kind of coach are you looking for? And oops.
Good question. Yeah, this is a very young team. The type of coach that we would look for is very similar to like the Mr. Mike Miller right now, who's our intern coach. More somebody that has experience developing young players, that's had experience in a rebuilding kind of situation. Somebody that knows what it takes to be successful. So the kind of coach that we look for is somebody that's just more seasoned with player development. That's something that we're really looking forward to attributing. It doesn't have to necessarily be a more mature coach. It doesn't necessarily have to be a younger coach. Just a coach that will have a fresh set of ears and eyes for the game, and that's willing to kind of work with the younger talent and the younger generation.
Also, would you consider looking outside of the NBA for coach?
Very excellent question. Yeah, everything is on decks. We have no problem probably going to the CBA or some of the international leagues out there and looking at different coaches with different philosophies. But we also do want a coach that understands the NBA game first, though, and is able to succeed at the NBA game because we're trying to develop players to be successful in the NBA.
Okay. What is your exact plan for this team? How do you see them like improving this team? They've been losing a lot,
Yes.
like for the past few years.
Yes.
It's been a lot of losing going on in New York, especially in the Knicks.
Yes.
And even with Spike leaving, and there's been a drought in sales, and like home games, this is the lowest it's been. What is your main plan to really change this team that no other team has? Like we had Phil Jackson here and he couldn't do it. So what makes you think that you're better to make this a better thing?
A lot of excellent points there, Mr. Smith.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I expected from the New York media. Uh, Great question. The plan here is like to I'll be more explicit with it as we get closer to the summer. But as the plan stands right now, first off, we're trying to make sure that we're able to create our identity here a basketball philosophy that this entire organization can stand by and align themselves with, which I don't think has really been here since Pat Riley in the early '90s, where hard nosed defense was the identity that Pat Riley stood on, and it stood from top to the bottom, and it was able to allow everybody to fit in and be successful with the New York Knicks. So right now, that's what we're trying to establish is a identity, a overall basketball philosophy of what we're gonna do and how we're gonna do it. So that'll be the first part of the plan, and then from there, we want to be able to build around the young players that we have here, and continue to show who's going to be the keepers, who's going to be the core here, and then from there, then bringing in free agents that complement those young players on top of the identity we've established. That's more or less the plan, and it's to be a champion within 5 years. That's the major goal here. That's the plan. So, next question, Ms. Candid.
Um, Given New York's frequent coaching changes,
Correct.
do you think that has attributed to much of the losing?
It's a very good question. Yes, we have had a lot of coaching changes. I do know the numbers in double figures in the last few years. And I think it has a lot to do with the losing. If you're not able to build chemistry and build an identity, then it's hard for you to be successful, which winning is. That's being successful. So we haven't been successful because we haven't built any chemistry or consistency. And that's the main thing that I'm trying to establish here is an identity so we can be consistent to that identity. But yes, I do believe the enormous amount of coaching changes have definitely contributed to a lot of this losing. Next question, sir.
You spoke about a heavy free agency, and that's what helps in building a team and stuff like that, right?
Correct.
So there's been rumors of CP3 being a free agent,
Mhm.
Carmelo Anthony being a free agent,
Mhm.
and you coming up with a lot of team options with a lot of players that drafted in. So what is your plan on are these players will be pursued to make because a point guard is needed?
Correct.
Are you going to keep Frank Ntilikina?
These are all excellent questions. These are all things that we all gonna answer as a team. But as far as my opinion, as far as like for Franklin Keene, I believe he's a keeper. I believe he's one of those players that is essential on all championship teams. He's a smart basketball player. He makes winning plays, and he's a elite defender. So I do believe that he's a keeper. He's a player that we want to maintain and have here. In what capacity? I think that's more for the coach to understand. Um, Now, as far as free agents are concerned, of course, we're going to look into free agents that I have a history with, but we're also going to look at all players available. Like we're going to try to make sure that we get a good look at all talent that could possibly work and fit to this team. So, like I said, we're going to try to build an identity and then build around that identity. And I feel like any player that has strong talent and is able to build around, we're going to be looking into. And then, as far as specifically, you mentioned Chris Paul and Carmelo Anthony. Those are former players that I represented. Uh, we would look at both of them. Specifically, I do think Carmelo Anthony does fit what it could be here. I think Carmelo Anthony could be an excellent mentor to the young players here. I still do feel like he can play, and I do know that he does want to continue playing, and I do know that he's an excellent teacher. So I do feel like Carmelo is an option, but that's something we have to see in the off season. And Chris Paul will be the same thing too. I think Chris Paul does have a lot in the tank. I think Chris Paul could be an excellent mentor and contributor to a New York team next year. That if we're looking to compete and we're looking to add players that will help us compete right now, a player like a Chris Paul with the Carmelo Anthony, I think both can be excellent players to bring in. But again, like we'll see all particular players that we can look at and see can possibly be a Nick and fit into the overall identity that we're going to create under this umbrella. Next question is
Kevin,
Camden.
do you think Kevin Knox is going to pair well with R.J. Barrett, seeing as how they have different styles?
That's an excellent question. I do feel they do have like particular different playing styles, and I think R.J. Barrett is He's a very aggressive by nature person, and I think that he's going to be more the leader of this team going forward. I think Kevin Knox is more a little bit reserved. He's more of a skilled finesse player. But I don't think that they won't be able to complement each other. I just think if they had to be, like, say, a 1-2 combination, they would be they would always be taken away from each other's talents. But in terms of like if Kevin Knox can coexist with RJ Barrett on the roster together and be able to enhance each other's development, I think they still can exist. I definitely do. Now, do I think that Kevin Knox should be moved, or do I still believe in Kevin Knox, the player? I think Kevin Knox has a great opportunity to still be an excellent player in this league. I do believe in his talent. I think he's an excellent offensive player. But I do feel like in recent years, some of the other players that have been brought into New York make it hard for Kevin Knox to be at his best potential or reach his potential with some of the other players on this roster. And it's just a bad mix for Kevin Knox, particularly. Like, I'm not saying that he needs to be moved, but I am saying that Kevin Knox is not particularly. We're not maximizing his potential in this particular environment with these particular players right now. I will agree with that. Yeah. And that was a great amount of questions.
I have one last question.
Go right ahead.
Um, some say you lack the experience to run an organization. What do you say to that?
That's another excellent question, Mr. Smith. Obviously, you've been in the New York Reporter for a while. Now, as far as experience is concerned, I've ran my own organizations for some time, and I've been very familiar with building a successful team. And some of these players that have had great careers that we look at and fans look at as great players, I was part of their team that got them to be the great players that they are. So I do know what it takes with a lot of these players that have gotten to those levels. I've been part of some of their journeys to get to that level. And now it's just expanding to 12 players on one team instead of 15 players on all different teams. So I think I'm the right guy, the perfect guy, and the guy that will get the job done. And you can look forward to the Knicks being a championship caliber team very soon in the next few years.
Okay. We like what we hear. We hope James Nolan keeps it out.
We don't know.
All right.
All right.
And that was Be a GM with Change of Pace Sports. Your host Kyle. We had some guests to help us out here as reporters from the Change of Pace staff. And again, this is just another run through of how I believe the Knicks should approach developing his team, how Leon Rose might develop his team. The Knicks have a lot of the right pieces in place. Fixing the Knicks is not that far. It's not that difficult. They have a lot of the right things there. Just a few tweaks and adjustments and little tools, and they'll be able to get themselves on the right path. But here was another creative episode of Changing Pace Sports with alternative views. If you like, go ahead and click that you did. If you have any comments, go ahead and join the conversation. Go jump right in the dialogue. Leave comments. Love leaving comments. And if you want more of this content, you go ahead and subscribe. Basketball content, football content, all kinds of sports. This is Change of Pace Sports with alternative views. I'm your host, Kay. Peace.